Hello, this is Alan again, continuing my series of videos on the ECL Enterprise Control Language created by LexisNexis and now open source, working on some of the clarifications of some of the more esoteric aspects of ECL. This video I thought I'd work on processing record structures at compile time. You can do an awful lot, you call them templates, and really they're macros that you can do really quite flexible and some neat stuff and tricks at compile time. Especially this is very handy when an awful lot of data sets have kind of hundreds of fields in them, and writing that all out by hand, processing, let's say, appending the letter A to every field could be quite a pain if you had to just write out that 200 times, whereas if you just wrote a little macro that went around that, you can see the strength and the leverage you get from using macros. Anyway, the way you manipulate record structures in ECL is you've got to really export them, the record structure, into a symbol that can then be processed by the built-ins in the macro processor. And really there's three functions which do this, and I don't think it does really explain it okay in a reference manual, but it's not at all clear. So you've got export, which as you can read here, produces XML text from a specified data, so that's your record structure, and puts it in a textual string in that symbol, which you can then use later on, but you have to load it into a template variable, which is not a string, using load XML. Here we are. It's opens an active XML scope language. Well, really, you're basically taking an XML string and putting it into a template variable. But there's also EXPORTXML, which really does the whole job in one fell swoop. But it's not at all clear, as I've said, how these three or works all the subtle differences between export and EXPORTXML. So I thought I'd just show all three really. So here I'm demoing the use of export and EXPORTXML. So I have a little record structure that I want to process, and it's just two variables, and in this case I'm going to demo export first of all. So with export you have to declare the string variable that you're going to use in export. So I was saying with export I want to export the XML definition of RR into rec, and it's a string variable, so I will output that string variable that will come out as a listing of XML. I then want to try and process it, so I declare item 1. I then want to process rec, but because it's just a string, this will not work, and item 1 will just be blank effectively. What you have to do to get, you then have to load the string, XML string, into loaded rec, which you can then use. So loaded rec is a string variable, as a template variable, which you can then process, and you'll get your output. You can see what's been generated and that output. So if I run this submit now, and shouldn't take too long. So here the result from the export, so this is the, if I run export and the content of rec, as I said, will be a string, and here we can see it's a string, and this is the definition of that record structure RR in XML. So you've got type A, label name A, it's of type unside 8, size You've got string 12, you've got various bits of information that you can use, and you can loop around this information here. Now if I try and use that as a template variable, it's not a template variable, it's a string. Basically nothing happens. We've got no output there. That's just rubbish, effectively blank. So what you have to use, as I say, you have to load the string, the XML string, into a template variable, which you use with load XML, which interestingly hasn't got a hash in front of it, but there you go. And now loaded rec will actually process something. So the result from using a loaded export into a template variable will actually have generated some outputs. And here we are, I've just concatenated the type and the name together here. Right, so that's export. And now moving on to EXPORTXML, this exports directly to a template variable. Now here you mustn't define, you can't have defined recxml beforehand, whereas for exports it's mandatory that this is defined before it's used, where this mustn't be defined before it's used. And now if you try and output it as a string, it won't be a string, it will just be, so here that's complete, that's just blank. But here you can use it directly without any load XML, and so this gets used, and as you can see, this is just me processing that record structure in some way without the load XML. So that's the difference, is that export will export a record structure into a string, and load XML will load it into a template variable, which can just be executed directly there. Now there's a definite gotcha here, which is a bit of a nasty. I deliberately made the variable names of this record structure capital case A and B, but if you notice in the output in the structure, it's given it comes out as lowercase name, which I must admit is a complete pain if you want to process XML tags and generate tag names, because of course XML is completely case sensitive, and if you want to generate some kind of let's say an XML string that's based on a field names, you may not be able to use them because it destroys case information, and to do things like parsing or XML parse, you need case preserved. So I think that's a bit of a hole in HPCC, which hopefully one day they will fix. Interestingly, in the reference manual, somewhere, I may not show it, I can't exactly know where they'll expose it, but here, name, you see, in the manual, it preserves case there in the name, which if I actually ran that, oh no, it's gone to uppercase, it hasn't preserved, that's made that the label, so the case here, sorry about that, that's DG again, it's destroyed case, but it's that is very weak, because that's all lowercase, so I'd have expected that all to be lowercase. If you can paste that out, that whole lot, and put that and just run that from the reference manual, I suspect you will not get this type of output here. You'll get something different from what you actually see here. So I suspect a change went in, goodness knows how far back, but as it stands at the moment, case is destroyed, which I say, if you're using XML parsing, can be quite significant. Anyway, that's it. Hopefully that's cleared up differences, subtle differences between template use, export and export XML. Anyway, all the best. See you in the next video. Cheers.